Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. Karen and I were the couple people envied. She had a charismatic charm, a knack for leadership in her project management career, and an infectious laugh that could lighten any room. I was the dependable one, quiet, steady, the one who kept everything running behind the scenes. Together, we had built a life that seemed perfect, a cozy home on a quiet street, 3 lively kids, and a sense of balance that most couples strive for but rarely achieve. At least, that's what I thought. It began innocently enough. Karen had a work trip, like she often did, to oversee a client project in a neighboring state. The kids and I had gotten used to these stretches of time without her. I'd pack their lunches, juggle bedtime stories, and try to keep the house from falling apart. I missed her, sure, but I was proud of how hard she worked. Her dedication, I believed, was for the family. One Friday evening, after I'd tucked the kids in, I noticed her laptop sitting on the dining table. She must have rushed out the door earlier and forgotten it. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but Karen had asked me to send her a file she'd been working on. I assumed she meant for me to use her laptop to find it. I opened the lid, and the screen flickered to life. Her email was already open. It was a mundane detail, something that happens all the time when someone leaves a device running. But then, a subject line caught my eye: "Can't wait to see you again this weekend, babe." At first, I froze, staring at the glowing words as if I could will them into changing. My heart thudded in my chest. I told myself it was probably a harmless message, some odd joke between colleagues. But curiosity, or maybe intuition, drove me to click. What I found shattered my world. The email was from someone named Alex. The exchange was painfully intimate, littered with endearments and inside jokes. There were mentions of trips they had taken, plans for upcoming weekends, and a detailed account of a dinner they'd shared the last time Karen had been away for work. My stomach churned as I scrolled. The timestamps aligned too perfectly with her supposed business trips. A cold knot of dread formed in my gut, tightening with each word I read. My Karen, the woman I had loved unconditionally for years, was living a double life. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't. I had to know how deep this betrayal ran. There was a receipt attached to one of the emails for a boutique hotel, one she had stayed at during what I thought was a leadership conference. The date made my breath hitch. That was the same weekend I had taken the kids to visit my parents to give her some quiet time. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. Anger boiled beneath the surface, but it was eclipsed by disbelief. How could she do this? How had I missed the signs? Our life together flashed before my eyes, every birthday party, every vacation, every quiet evening on the couch, and it all felt like a lie. But I didn't confront her that night. I needed more. More proof, more clarity, more time to figure out what the hell I was going to do. The next few days were a blur. Karen returned from her trip as cheerful as ever, greeting the kids with hugs and kisses and slipping seamlessly back into our routine. She even kissed me on the cheek, her lips warm against my skin. I stiffened but forced a smile, unwilling to tip my hand just yet. While she was busy unpacking, I checked her phone. It was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. It was our oldest son's birth date. She didn't have anything incriminating in her messages, but I did find a folder tucked away in her photo gallery. Inside were pictures of her and Alex. They were at the beach, their arms wrapped around each other, smiling like teenagers. The date stamps didn't lie, these photos were from months ago, during another business trip. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. But I also didn't want to confront her in the heat of the moment. I needed to think strategically, to plan. If she was willing to lie to me this easily, what else was she capable of? Over the next week, I gathered evidence. It was easier than I expected. Karen wasn't as careful as she thought. Emails, receipts, social media posts, they painted a picture of a woman who had grown careless in her deception. Maybe she thought I'd never suspect her. Or maybe she didn't care. I started piecing together a timeline. Every conference and meeting she had attended over the past year matched up with her emails to Alex. I felt like a detective in a bad movie, sifting through evidence of a betrayal I never thought I'd face. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. At dinner, I'd watch her laugh with the kids, wondering how she could be so deceitful. At night, I'd lie awake beside her, torn between fury and heartbreak. She slept soundly, her breathing even, while my mind raced with questions. But my anger sharpened my focus. This wasn't just about me, it was about our family. Karen had chosen to betray not just me, but the life we had built together. She needed to be held accountable, and I was going to make sure of it. The opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later, on her birthday. Karen loved parties, loved being the center of attention, so I told her I had planned a surprise celebration. Her eyes lit up, and she didn't suspect a thing. She even hugged me, whispering, "You're the best husband," into my ear. The irony wasn't lost on me. I rented a small banquet hall and invited our closest friends and family. Everyone thought it was just a birthday party, but for me, it was the stage for her reckoning. I put together a slideshow, compiling all the evidence I had gathered, the emails, the photos, the receipts. It was cruel, maybe, but so was her betrayal. As the day approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm inside me had settled into a cold resolve. Karen thought she had outsmarted me, but she was about to learn otherwise. Everything was in place. All I had to do was wait. The day of Karen's birthday arrived, and the house buzzed with the usual chaos of preparing for a celebration. Balloons and streamers cluttered the living room, and the kids excitedly helped me pack decorations into the car. Karen, as always, basked in the attention. She had no idea that this day wasn't going to end the way she expected. Throughout the morning, she was in high spirits, chatting with her friends on the phone and checking in on what I was up to. She even asked, "What's the big surprise, huh? You've been so secretive." I played along, laughing and promising it would be worth the wait. I marveled at how easily she acted like everything was normal, as if the weight of her double life didn't burden her in the slightest. I'd rehearsed the moment in my mind 100 times. How would she react when the truth came crashing down? Would she cry? Deny it? Storm out of the room? Whatever happened, I was ready. The banquet hall was small but tastefully decorated, a perfect setting for an intimate gathering. Friends and family started arriving around 4 p.m., carrying gifts and warm smiles. The kids greeted everyone excitedly, thrilled to see their grandparents, aunts, and uncles. The atmosphere was light and cheerful, exactly what Karen expected. When she walked into the room, everyone shouted, "Surprise!" Her eyes widened, and she brought a hand to her chest in mock shock. "Oh my gosh, you guys," she exclaimed, beaming as she hugged people and thanked them for coming. She looked radiant, dressed in a deep red blouse and black skirt, her hair cascading in soft waves. It was hard to reconcile the woman who laughed with our friends and posed for pictures with the one who had betrayed me so completely. For a moment, I felt a pang of doubt. Was this too cruel? Was I going too far? But then I remembered the emails. The photos. The lies. No, I told myself, she brought this on herself. Dinner was served, and the room filled with the clatter of utensils and the hum of conversation. Karen moved easily from table to table, laughing and chatting with everyone. She had always been good at this, being the center of attention, making people feel at ease. Watching her, I wondered how much of her charm was genuine and how much was just another mask she wore. When dessert was brought out, a 3-tiered cake with "Happy Birthday, Karen," written in pink icing, she looked at me with gratitude. "You really outdid yourself," she said, squeezing my hand. I forced a smile. If only she knew what was coming. As the cake was being served, I stood up and clinked my glass to get everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Karen's special day, I began, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. It's been such a joy to have all of you here. But before we wrap up, I've prepared a little surprise for Karen, a look back at some of the highlights from this past year. Karen's face lit up. She loved sentimental gestures, and she leaned back in her chair, ready to soak in the praise. The lights dimmed, and the projector whirred to life. The first few slides were exactly what she expected: pictures of our family at the park, the kids at their school play, a vacation photo from the beach. The room was filled with smiles and murmurs of appreciation. Then the tone shifted. An image of Karen and Alex at a beachside restaurant appeared on the screen. They were laughing, their heads tilted close together. There was a beat of silence before someone in the room whispered, "Who's that?" Karen froze, her smile faltering. "Wait, what's?" Before she could finish, the next slide appeared. It was a screenshot of an email exchange, with Alex's name clearly visible in the header. The subject line read, "Can't wait to see you again this weekend, babe." Gasps rippled through the room. I kept my voice calm. "Karen has been working hard this year," I said, "but it seems she's been working hardest at something none of us expected." More photos and emails followed, each one damning. The room was thick with tension. Karen's parents stared at her in stunned disbelief. Her sister covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. The kids, thankfully, were too busy playing in a corner to notice the commotion. Karen shot out of her chair. "Turn it off," she hissed, her voice frantic. She turned to me, her face flushed with anger and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" I ignored her and clicked to the final slide. It was a simple message: "This marriage is over. Divorce papers will be served tomorrow." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen looked around the room, her expression a mix of rage and humiliation. "You had no right to do this," she shouted. "This is private. It's none of their business." "You made it their business," I replied coldly. "Every time you lied to me, every time you pretended to be someone you're not, you made it everyone's business." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. Her father stood up, his face red with fury. "Is this true, Karen?" he demanded. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to realize there was no point. Her silence was answer enough. People started murmuring and shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Karen's mother grabbed her purse and headed for the door, shaking her head. "I can't believe this," she muttered. "I just can't believe it." Karen turned back to me, her voice trembling. "You've ruined everything," she said. "How could you do this to me?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "I didn't ruin anything, Karen. You did. All I did was show everyone the truth." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving her to face the wreckage of her lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out, and there was no going back. When I got home that night, I sat in the quiet living room, reflecting on what had just happened. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I was done being a pawn in Karen's game. It was time to start over, this time on my terms. The days after the party were surreal. Karen had always been a force of nature, confident, sharp-tongued, and quick to take control of any situation. But now, her silence was deafening. She stayed in the guest room, emerging only when necessary. The house, once filled with the hum of her laughter and the sound of her constant phone calls, felt eerily quiet. For my part, I went about my routine with a strange sense of calm. The kids, thankfully, seemed unaffected. They asked why their mom wasn't eating dinner with us, but I gave them vague answers about her being busy with work. They accepted it without much fuss. Karen's betrayal wasn't their burden to carry. I had already contacted my lawyer before the party, ensuring everything was in place to proceed with the divorce. Karen had no idea, but the papers were being finalized. When she finally did speak to me, it wasn't to apologize or to explain. It was to try to bargain. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Karen came into the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy. It was the first time I'd seen her without her usual polished appearance. She sat down at the table, her hands clasped tightly together. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Talk about what?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "About us. About what happened. What is there to talk about, Karen? You cheated. You lied. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. What more do you want to say?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. I had spent too many nights questioning myself, wondering what I could have done differently. I wasn't about to let her twist the narrative. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "A terrible mistake. But it wasn't because I didn't love you. I do love you. I always have." I laughed bitterly. "You have a funny way of showing it." She flinched but pressed on. "It wasn't about you, Mark. It was about me. I felt lost. Like I wasn't enough anymore. Like I was just a wife and a mother and nothing else." "That's not an excuse," I said flatly. "You could have talked to me. You could have told me how you were feeling. Instead, you decided to sneak around with Alex." Her face crumpled. "I know. I know I should have, but I didn't think you'd understand. You're always so steady. So sure of yourself. I felt like I was drowning, and Alex, he made me feel alive again." I shook my head, disgusted. "And what about me? What about the family we built together? Did that mean nothing to you?" "It meant everything," she said, her voice breaking. "That's why I want to fix this. I'll end things with Alex. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Her words hung in the air, desperate and pleading. But I couldn't feel anything but anger and a cold sense of finality. "There's no fixing this," I said. "It's too late, Karen. You destroyed the trust we had. Without that, there's nothing left." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "So that's it? You're just going to throw everything away?" "I'm not the one who threw it away," I replied. "You did that the moment you decided to be with him." Her expression hardened. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you've never made a mistake. Well, let me tell you something, Mark, you're not perfect. You've been so focused on your job and the kids that you forgot about me. You think this was all my fault. Maybe you should take a look in the mirror." Her words stung, but I didn't let them show. "This isn't about me, Karen. This is about you. You made a choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." She stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. I stayed there for a while, staring at the floor and wondering if I had been too harsh. But no matter how much I turned it over in my mind, I couldn't find a way to forgive her. The next morning, the divorce papers arrived. I placed them on the dining table, where I knew she'd see them. When she came downstairs, she stopped in her tracks, her eyes fixed on the stack of documents. She didn't say anything, just stood there, clutching the back of a chair. "I think this is the best thing for both of us," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You'll be free to figure out what you want, and I can focus on moving forward." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded slowly. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that's what you want." "It's what we need," I replied. She picked up the papers and walked back to the guest room without another word. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and difficult conversations. Telling the kids was the hardest part. Karen and I sat them down together, explaining that we were separating but that we both still loved them very much. Emma, our oldest, took it the hardest. She cried, asking why we couldn't just work things out. I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, so I simply said, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and it's better for everyone if we live apart. Karen moved out shortly after that. She found a small apartment on the other side of town, close enough to see the kids on her scheduled weekends but far enough that we wouldn't cross paths. The house felt emptier without her, but also lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. One evening, as I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone, a message popped up from an old college friend. It was a simple text, "Heard about what happened. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. I hadn't told many people about the details of the divorce, but word had spread. People knew, and for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed. I hadn't done anything wrong. I put the phone down and looked around the room. The kids were upstairs, their laughter echoing faintly through the house. Despite everything, life was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move with it. Life settled into a new routine after Karen moved out. The divorce was finalized with little drama, just signatures on papers and a division of assets. I kept the house and primary custody of the kids. Karen got her apartment and regular visitation. It was cleaner than I had expected, and I thought that chapter of my life was closed. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Months passed, and I threw myself into work and raising the kids. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. It cleared my mind and gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. The kids adjusted faster than I had hoped, even Emma, who had struggled at first. They loved their weekends with Karen, and I made sure never to say anything negative about her around them. Whatever happened between us wasn't their fault, and I wanted them to have a good relationship with their mom. Karen, too, seemed to have moved on. She didn't try to win me back or plead for another chance. She focused on her time with the kids and kept our interactions civil. Part of me respected her for that. Maybe she realized there was no going back. I thought I had everything figured out. Until the letter arrived. It was a regular Tuesday evening. The kids were upstairs doing homework, and I was sorting through the mail at the kitchen table. Bills, flyers, and a plain white envelope with no return address. My name was scrawled across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. Curious, I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As I read the first few lines, my stomach dropped. "Mark, I don't know how else to tell you this, but you deserve to know the truth. Alex wasn't the only one Karen was seeing. She was involved with someone else, too, someone close to you. You may want to have a conversation with George." George. My best friend. The man who had been at my side through every major moment in my life. The man who had stood next to me at my wedding. The letter was unsigned, but the details were chillingly specific. Dates, places, things only someone with intimate knowledge of the situation could know. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. Could it be true? Could Karen's betrayal have run even deeper than I thought? The next day, I called Karen. It was the first time I had reached out to her since the divorce was finalized. "I got a letter," I said without preamble. "It mentioned George. Care to explain?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "Mark, I didn't want you to find out like this." "So it's true," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. "You were sleeping with him, too." "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "It was one time. I was upset, and he was there. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I spat. "You had an affair with my best friend, Karen." Do you have any idea how disgusting that is? I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't want you to get hurt. I laughed bitterly. Too late for that. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. My mind raced with memories of George, how he'd been there for me during the worst moments of my life, how I had trusted him with everything. I felt sick. But anger gave way to something else, determination. I needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. I drove to George's house that evening. He lived a few blocks away, in the same modest bungalow he'd had for years. His truck was in the driveway, and the lights were on. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. When he opened it, his face fell. He knew why I was there. "Mark," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said. "Don't try to lie to me. Just tell me the truth. Did you sleep with Karen?" His shoulders slumped, and he stepped aside to let me in. We stood in his living room, the air thick with tension. "It happened once," he admitted. "A long time ago. Before you found out about Alex. I swear, it didn't mean anything." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "Why? Why would you do that to me?" "I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "I was drunk, she was upset, and one thing led to another. It was a mistake. The worst mistake I've ever made." "Mistake?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You didn't just betray me, you betrayed my entire family. My kids. Do you even understand what you've done?" "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes filled with regret. "If I could take it back, I would." I shook my head. "You don't get to be sorry. You don't get to make this right. We're done, George. Don't ever contact me again." I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The drive home was a blur. By the time I got back to the house, I felt numb. I put the kids to bed, plastering on a smile and pretending everything was fine. But once they were asleep, I sat in the dark living room, replaying everything in my mind. Karen. George. The lies. The betrayal. It was all too much. Then, as I sat there, a thought struck me, one that sent a chill down my spine. What if the letter wasn't just about revealing the truth? What if it was sent to destroy what little peace I had left? Someone out there knew everything about Karen, about George, about me. Someone was watching. And they weren't done yet.